She came with one trunk, no ribbon, no veil, no one waiting to cheer, just a folded paper in her coat, a name, an address, and a promise that maybe this time she wouldn't be sent back. 52 years old, not a widow, not yet divorced, just left behind too many times to bother labeling herself anymore. She wasn't pretty by town standards. Her hands were too calloused from washing other people's linens, her body too broad, too tired. Men used to say she'd make a decent mule, but not a bride. But still she came, because hope is a stubborn thing. The train hissed like it pitied her, and when she stepped down, heart-bracing for another cold look or cruel joke, there he was, Elam Granger, tall, worn, quiet. He didn't bring flowers, he didn't ask for her weight, he just smiled, held open the door of his wagon and said, "You must be tired, I'm glad you made it." She thought this must be a mistake. Kindness never comes first. But what if it wasn't? What if the real story doesn't start when the train arrives, but when a stranger doesn't turn away? What happened when she walked into a house that asked nothing from her? What wounds did she carry that still whispered, "Don't trust this"? And most of all, what kind of love doesn't demand beauty, just your quiet willingness to stay? Let's sit with this story a while. You might see a piece of yourself in her, or maybe in the man who finally left the door open. Clara Wynne folded her only good dress into a square of brown paper. She'd written 3 goodbye notes, tore up all 3. There wasn't anyone left who'd read them kindly. By the time the stagecoach rumbled into town, she was already standing by the depot bonnet, low valise in hand, spine too straight to show her ache. At 51, Clara didn't believe in starting over. She believed in surviving differently. Her father had called it selling herself. Her sister said no man would want her at that size, that age, or that silence. But the letter in her pocket told another story. It was written in plain words. No flourishes, no false charm, just this: if you're willing, I built a home that could hold 2. There's land, there's quiet. I'm not looking for a servant or a girl to keep warm. I'm looking for someone who knows the value of calm. E. Granger. That was all, and somehow it was more than anyone had ever offered her. The journey west was long, dusty. She sat wedged between a preacher and a drunk who snored with his hat over his face. No one asked her name. No one noticed when she flinched at every shout, every jolt, every sudden laugh that reminded her of men back home, the ones who mocked the way she walked, the ones who said she'd missed her window. She looked out the window for 3 days straight. The horizon never stopped moving, and neither did the dull throb behind her ribs, the one that whispered, "What if he laughs when he sees you? What if he never shows up?" But she clung to the letter, not for what it promised, for what it didn't. It never said she had to smile. It never said she had to earn anything, just that she could arrive. When the stage finally stopped in a town called Elnora Ridge, she stepped down stiffly. Her bonnet was crooked, her shoes dust-worn, but she stood tall, hand on her valise, like a woman who still knew her name, even if no one had spoken it kindly in years. She waited. The others dispersed. The sun lowered. Still she waited. And just as doubt began to pull at her sleeves like an old wind, a man appeared, broad-shouldered, weather-lined, quiet eyes. He removed his hat, stepped forward, and said, "Miss Wynne, I'm Elam Granger. You look just like yourself." And then he smiled. Not the way men smile to charm, but the way people smile when they've been waiting for someone real. And behind him, a horse already saddled, a road already chosen, a house she hadn't seen yet, but already felt different than anything she'd ever called home. She didn't speak right away. She only exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. The ride to Elam Granger's ranch was quiet. Not the kind of silence that demands explanation, but the kind that doesn't pry, doesn't press, doesn't fill the space with noise just to avoid the weight of it. Clara had known men who talked too much, and worse men who only talked when they wanted something. But Elam, he asked if she was cold, offered her his coat without ceremony, and when she declined, he nodded like he trusted she knew her own body. They arrived at dusk. The house wasn't grand. One level, a porch with 2 rocking chairs, one crooked with age. But the door was painted fresh, and the lantern by the rail still flickered, like it had been waiting for someone to return. He dismounted first, then offered his hand. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to take it, but because she wasn't used to being offered anything gently. Her fingers met his rough from tools, but warm. He helped her down, then stepped aside. "You can come in when you're ready," he said. "It's your house too if you want it to be." She stood on the porch for a long moment, hand resting on the post, the night wind brushing her cheek like a question. Are you brave enough to believe this might be safe? Then, she stepped inside. The first thing she noticed wasn't the furniture, but the quiet order of the place. Boots by the door, a fire going, a kettle steaming softly on the stove, as if someone had been making tea for two out of habit for a long time. And on the table, a plate of biscuits. Not fancy, just warm. I don't cook much, he said, but I try not to let people go hungry. She nodded. That's more than most. He sat across from her, not too close. No questions, no list of chores, just simple talk, weather, fences. His late wife mentioned once, without sorrow, only respect. When she excused herself, he pointed to the small bedroom at the end of the hall. The bed's yours. You'll find clean linens. If you need anything, knock once. I'll hear you. He didn't follow her, didn't linger at the doorway. He just returned to the porch. And when she peeked out from the curtain later, he was sitting there in the rocker, quiet, still, like someone who kept watch, not to possess, but to honor presence. That night, Clara lay on the unfamiliar bed. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just listened to the hush of wind, the creak of the floorboards, the breath of a house that didn't demand anything from her. And for the first time in years, she slept with her shoes off. What happens when you're not asked to prove yourself, but simply allowed to rest? The days that followed were soft. The kind of soft Clara didn't know what to do with. She woke each morning to the scent of coffee already made, a porch that never locked, and a man who always left a place for her at the table whether or not she came. He never asked what she could do, only what she preferred. Some days she swept the kitchen. Other days she just sat on the porch with her book, turning pages she didn't always read, and Elam never interrupted. You don't owe me usefulness, he once said. Your presence is not a transaction. But still, the voice inside her rose like a prairie wind. You're a burden. You're taking up space. No one keeps someone like you unless they want something in return. One morning she baked cornbread, her mother's recipe, slightly burned on the edges but warm in the middle. When she placed it on the table, she said stiffly, I thought I should offer something. Elam looked up, puzzled. You don't need to earn your place, Clara. You being here is already a gift. That's when the tears surprised her. Not because of what he said, but because no one had ever said it before. That night she stayed in her room longer, looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the wash basin. Her body was broad, her hands worn. Her softness, the thing men once mocked, the thing women pitied, was still there. She whispered to the woman in the mirror, why would someone want this? And no answer came, only the sound of a creaking rocker outside. He was waiting, as always, not demanding, just there. She walked out onto the porch. The sky was full of stars, too many to name. Elam glanced at her gently. Couldn't sleep. She nodded. Then after a pause, I don't know how to receive this. He didn't ask what this meant, he just nodded, like he understood. That's all right, he said. You don't have to know, you just have to stay long enough to find out. She sat beside him in silence. 2 chairs, 1 rhythm, no grand romance, no sudden spark, just a quiet, unfamiliar safety. And that scared her more than anything. What if love doesn't come crashing in but waits quietly on a porch asking nothing, except that you believe it's real? The wind changed that week. There was rain in the air, not a storm, just the kind that settles deep into the bones and makes old memories ache. Clara moved slower. She wasn't ill, just quiet inside, like something was shifting. Elam noticed. He didn't name it. He just brought an extra blanket to her rocker on the porch one evening and said, nights are getting cooler. And she let him tuck it around her knees. She didn't flinch, didn't retreat. She just let him. The next day, she asked if he needed help repairing the gate out back. He looked surprised, but not reluctant. Only if you want to, he said. They worked in silence, her holding the wood steady, him hammering the nails with worn precision. Midway through, her sleeve caught on a rusted nail. It tore a little. Elam reached to check her arm, then paused. May I? She nodded. His hand brushed against her skin. Rough, gentle. She didn't pull away. Later they sat on the porch again, watching clouds roll over the hills. Elam sipped his coffee. I know I'm not what you pictured, he said quietly. I'm not poetic or polished, just steady. Clara looked at him. I didn't come for poetry. A long pause, then softer than she meant to admit, I came because you didn't ask me to change. That night she didn't close her bedroom door. She didn't leave it wide open either, just a sliver, enough to say, I'm not ready to disappear tonight. And at some quiet hour she heard footsteps pause in the hallway. not entering, just passing, just there. The next morning she found a folded note by the kitchen lamp. "You don't owe me closeness, Clara, but if you ever choose it, I'll be here, same place, same porch." There was no signature, but she didn't need one. She held the paper in her hand like something sacred, not because it was romantic, but because it was patient. And that was new, that was rare. She walked out into the sunlight, barefoot, apron tied loosely around her waist. And for the first time since arriving, she didn't wonder if she'd earned her place. She just began her day, right there, beside him. What happens when you are no longer trying to prove you deserve love, but start to wonder if love was always waiting for you to slow down enough to receive it? Spring arrived without fanfare. Just the slow bloom of wildflowers near the fence line, the longer light in the evenings, the birds that began nesting in the old elm beside the porch. Clara rose with the sun now. She cooked without asking if it was expected. She swept the porch before Elam came outside, not as a duty, but as an offering. Not because she had to, but because she wanted the space to feel tended to like she was day after day. One morning she caught him watching her hands while she kneaded dough. She paused. "What?" He shook his head, voice quiet. "I was just thinking. How many years those hands worked for people who didn't see their worth." She didn't look up, but her hands, wide, strong, familiar, pressed into the dough with something that felt close to pride. "They see it now," she whispered. Sometimes they sat without speaking. Other times they told small stories, childhood memories, broken pieces of past years that no longer cut when said aloud. Clara told him how a man once locked her out of her own house for speaking too boldly. Elam told her how he hadn't cried since his wife passed until the night Clara slept with the door cracked open. That sliver of space, he said, felt like the world coming back. One afternoon as they watched a storm roll in from the west, Clara reached for his hand. No words, just skin against skin, old fingers curled together like two trees learning to lean, not fall. He turned toward her. No urgency, no surprise. "So we stay?" he asked. She smiled, the kind that comes after long winters and longer silences. "I think we already are." That night there was no need for notes. The doors stayed open, the lamps stayed low, and the house once so still breathed easy, like it had finally become a home again. Love didn't arrive loudly. It settled in like a blanket, soft, steady, and chosen. News spread slow in a town like Elnora Ridge, but gossip that moved like wildfire in dry brush. Clara first noticed it at the general store. Two women paused when she walked in, eyes skimming her shape, lingering too long on her hands, her hips the worn hem of her dress. One whispered, "She's the one Elam took in." Another replied, "A mail-order bride at her age. I thought he had better sense." Clara didn't flinch, not outwardly. But that old ache, the one she thought had quieted, stirred like a sleeping dog. She told Elam that night. Not with drama, not fishing for comfort, just said plainly, "They talk about me." He nodded. "They've always talked." She looked at him, eyes shadowed by doubt. "Does it bother you?" He turned to her, voice. "Even Clara, I didn't build this house for their approval. I built it for peace. And you walking through that door was the first time it ever felt like peace meant something." But the whispers didn't stop. A man from Elam's past came calling Wyatt Carr, old friend turned bitter. He stood on the porch, hat low tone, hard. "Folks think you've gone soft, Elam, taking in a woman like that. People talk." Elam didn't rise to meet the insult. He just leaned against the frame of the door, arms crossed. "Then let them talk." Wyatt scoffed. "You could have had any woman. Why pick the one nobody else did?" Elam's answer was quiet, unmoving. "Because she's the only one I don't have to pretend around." From inside the house, Clara heard every word. And something inside her, something buried under years of shame, broke loose. Not in pain, but in relief. That night she stepped outside and sat beside Elam. She didn't ask him to defend her. She didn't need to. She simply took his hand in hers and said, "You don't have to protect me from the town. I've been through worse than whispers." He nodded, eyes soft. "But I'll protect you anyway, because I can, and because you're not alone anymore. The world may judge what it doesn't understand, but some things aren't up for debate, like the quiet power of choosing each other again and again." Summer came softly to Elnora Ridge. The land grew fuller, the porch grew warmer, and Clara's days no longer started with wondering if she should leave, but with small decisions only women who feel at home dare to make. She stitched new curtains for the kitchen, started keeping herbs by the windowsill, laughed sometimes, the kind of laugh that didn't apologize for its volume or where it came from. One morning Elam brought her a carved box. Nothing grand, pine smooth, edges a tiny latch. Inside, folded cloth. and resting atop it a silver ring modest and unpolished. She looked at him. "Is this a proposal?" He shrugged, gentle smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Not if you don't want it to be. But I figure a woman should have something that says, you're here, and you're not going anywhere unless you want to." Clara held the ring. It wasn't a symbol of belonging to someone. It was proof she didn't have to keep wandering. She slid it onto her own finger, then let it be a vow she said that neither of us needs to keep performing to be loved. On Sundays, they left the house gates open. Not for guests, but for air, light, and a sense that nothing needed to be hidden anymore. And in town, people still talked. But Clara no longer carried their voices in her bones. She had new sounds now. The scrape of Elam's boots on the porch, the low hum of 2 rocking chairs, the clink of coffee cups passed in quiet understanding. One evening as dusk poured over the fields, Elam said, "You ever think it's strange the way 2 lives can meet so late and still feel like beginning?" Clara leaned against him. "Maybe we just had to live through enough silence to finally recognize the sound of being seen." They sat that way until the stars came, and the door behind them, once a symbol of maybe, stood wide open, just like them. Not every love story begins young. Some are born from broken years, rebuilt slowly in kitchens, on porches, through kindness that asks nothing but presence. And in that, Clara Wynne found not just a home, but a quiet kind of forever. Would you like to hear more stories like Clara and Elam's, where love doesn't rush in but waits patiently on the porch? Sometimes love doesn't arrive like a firework. It doesn't shout. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. Sometimes it comes in the form of a warm chair pulled up beside you, a cup of coffee left waiting, a man who doesn't need you to smile but smiles anyway when you walk into the room. Clara didn't come west looking for romance. She came because life had shut too many doors behind her, and this was the only one left open. But what she found wasn't rescue. It wasn't passion. It was something far rarer, a place to rest without apology, a love that saw her exactly as she was and stayed. And maybe that's what many of us are still hoping for. So if this story stirred something in you, a memory, a longing, or even just a quiet tear, we invite you to join us here at None Wild West Saga, where the prairie is wide, the hearts are older, and love takes its time but always finds a way. Subscribe if you believe in second chances. Share this story with someone who's waited long for kindness. And in the comments, tell us, would you like to see what happens next in Clara and Elam's story? Or hear another tale of late blooming love? We're listening, always.